When the letter arrived, Sarah thought it was a mistake. She didn't own anything. She barely owned the backpack she carried from shelter to shelter. So when she read the words, "You have inherited property," she almost laughed. Property? From who? The name at the bottom made her pause. Her grandfather, a man she barely remembered. A man who disappeared from family stories like he never existed. The letter said the inheritance was a mountain cabin, sealed since 1948. No one had entered it in over 70 years. Sarah read that line again, sealed. Why would anyone seal a cabin for decades, and why leave it to her? She had nothing left to lose, no apartment, no savings, no one waiting for her anywhere. So she borrowed bus money and traveled into the mountains, following old directions printed on fading paper. When she finally stood in front of the cabin, it looked untouched by time. The windows were boarded. The door had an official metal seal still attached. She placed her hand on it. Her fingers trembled as she broke it open. And the moment the door creaked inward, she realized the past had been waiting for someone. Sarah used to believe that if she worked hard enough, life would stay stable. She was wrong. The divorce happened quickly. 1 month they were arguing. The next month he was gone. What little savings they had disappeared into legal fees and unpaid credit cards. She tried to hold everything together for her daughter, Lily. She picked up extra shifts at the diner. She cleaned houses on weekends. She told herself it was temporary. But temporary turned into eviction. The landlord gave her 2 notices before changing the locks. After that, it was shelters, sleeping in her car until it broke down. Carrying their clothes in plastic bags, smiling for Lily even when she felt like she was breaking. Family stopped calling after the divorce. Her father had passed years earlier. Her mother lived across the country and had her own struggles. As for her grandfather, the only thing she remembered was a faded photograph of him standing in front of trees. He had always been described as quiet, distant, different. No one talked about why. When the letter about the inheritance arrived at the shelter office, Sarah almost ignored it. She thought it was a debt notice or a mistake, but the caseworker insisted she open it. "Looks official," the woman said. Sarah sat at the plastic table and tore the envelope carefully. The words felt unreal. "You are the sole beneficiary of a mountain property located in Pine Hollow. The structure has remained legally sealed since 1948. Legally sealed." The phrase echoed in her mind. Who seals a cabin for 70 years? And why leave it to someone like her? She read the letter again. The will had been updated decades ago. Her grandfather had placed the property in a trust. No other heirs named. Not her father, not her uncles, her. It didn't make sense. She hadn't seen her grandfather since she was 5 years old. He had died long before she understood family history. Yet somehow he had chosen her. That night, lying on a thin shelter mattress with Lily asleep beside her, Sarah stared at the ceiling. She had $42 in her pocket. No job, no home, and now a mountain cabin. Even if it was falling apart, it was something, ownership, a place no landlord could take. The next morning she asked the caseworker about Pine Hollow. "Up north," the woman said, "deep woods, hard winters." Sarah nodded slowly. Hard winters were nothing new. She borrowed bus money from another woman at the shelter, promising to repay it somehow. She packed their small bags and told Lily they were going on an adventure. "Are we moving again?" Lily asked quietly. "Maybe for the last time," Sarah said. As the bus climbed into the mountains, the world outside the window changed. Buildings disappeared, trees grew taller. The air looked colder. Sarah clutched the envelope tightly in her hand. She didn't know what waited at the end of that road. Maybe nothing but dust and broken wood. Maybe answers no one else wanted. But for the first time in months, she wasn't running from something. She was walking toward it. And somewhere in those mountains stood a cabin that had been locked since 1948, waiting. The bus dropped them off at the last stop before the road ended. After that, there were no more paved streets, only a narrow path leading deeper into the trees. Sarah adjusted the strap on her backpack and looked down at Lily. "Cold?" she asked. "A little," Lily admitted, pulling her jacket tighter. The mountains felt different from the city. The air was thinner, quieter, every sound carried. Sarah followed the directions written in the letter, 3 miles past the old bridge, left at the fallen pine. Up the gravel trail that barely looked like a trail anymore. The deeper they walked, the more isolated it felt. No houses, no cars, no voices, just wind brushing through trees. After almost an hour, Lily pointed ahead. "Is that it?" Sarah stopped. Through the trees, she saw it. A small wooden cabin sitting alone in a clearing. It didn't look destroyed. It looked paused. The windows were covered with wooden boards. The roof was old but intact. The door stood closed with something metallic fastened across it. They stepped closer. A faded government seal was bolted over the handle, rusted but still there. Sarah's heart pounded. It wasn't just abandoned. It had been officially sealed. She ran her fingers over the metal plate. Stamped across it were the words, "Property closed by order of the county, 1948. Lily looked up at her. "Why did they close it?" Sarah shook her head slowly. "I don't know." The clearing around the cabin felt untouched. No recent footprints, no broken branches. Even the path behind them seemed to disappear quickly. It was as if the forest had protected this place, or hidden it. Sarah walked around the cabin carefully. No broken windows, no obvious damage, just silence. She returned to the door and pulled the small envelope from her pocket again. Inside was a notarized document authorizing her to remove the seal as the legal heir. Her hands trembled. She felt like she was about to open something more than a door. Lily squeezed her hand. "Are you scared?" Lily asked softly. Sarah hesitated. "A little." She reached into her bag and pulled out the small wrench she had borrowed from the shelter's maintenance closet before leaving. The bolts were old, stubborn. It took several minutes of effort before the first one loosened. The metal screeched slightly as it shifted. The sound echoed through the trees. Sarah paused, listening. Nothing moved. She removed the final bolt and carefully lowered the seal into her hands. For 70 years, that piece of metal had kept the door closed. She placed it gently on the ground. The wooden door looked heavy, old. She wrapped her fingers around the handle. For a moment she thought about turning back, about walking away and pretending she had never come. But she had nothing left behind her. She pushed the door slowly. It creaked open. A rush of stale air flowed out, cold, still, and carrying the weight of decades. Sarah stepped forward just enough to look inside. The cabin wasn't empty. It wasn't destroyed. It looked exactly as if someone had just stepped out in 1948 and never returned. Sarah stood in the doorway for a long moment. Dust floated in the air, but not thick enough to hide the details. The cabin looked frozen in time. A wooden table sat in the center of the room with 2 plates still resting on it. A cup stood near the edge, as if someone had set it down and meant to come back. A coat hung on a hook by the door. The fireplace held old ashes. Nothing was overturned. Nothing was broken. It wasn't abandoned in chaos. It was abandoned in silence. Lily stepped inside slowly. "It looks like a movie," she whispered. Sarah moved carefully across the floor. The wood creaked, but it felt solid. The air carried a faint scent of old paper and pine. On one wall, a calendar still hung. The page was open to October 1948. Sarah's chest tightened. Who leaves in the middle of October and never returns? She walked toward a small bookshelf near the window. The books were neatly arranged, some about farming, some about land ownership. One journal sat slightly apart from the others. Her fingers hovered over it. She picked it up slowly. The cover was worn but clean. Inside, neat handwriting filled the pages. Entries dated September 1948. Meeting with H. Went poorly. Documents must stay here for now. They don't understand what they're signing. Sarah's pulse quickened. She flipped further. The land is worth more than they realize. The agreement is a trap. The writing grew more urgent near the end. If anything happens, the proof is hidden. The final entry was dated October 14, 1948. They came back today. That was it. No more entries. Sarah closed the journal carefully. Lily wandered toward the kitchen area. "Mom, there's food in here." Sarah rushed over. Inside a cabinet were glass jars of preserved vegetables, sealed tight, labeled neatly. The labels had faded but were still readable. Everything had been prepared carefully, as if the owner expected to return. Sarah stepped into the small bedroom. The bed was made. Clothes folded neatly at the foot. A framed photograph sat on the nightstand. She picked it up. It was her grandfather, younger, strong, standing in front of the same cabin. Beside him stood another man. The second man's face looked familiar. Sarah frowned. She had seen that face before, but where? Her mind searched for the memory. Then it hit her. A statue in the center of town. A plaque. A wealthy businessman known as one of the city's early developers. The same last name she had heard growing up in stories about land expansion. Why would her quiet grandfather be standing beside someone that powerful? She turned the photo over. Written on the back were 3 words. "Trust no one." Her breath caught. The same message carved into the floor at her old house. Only this time it was complete. Lily walked into the room. "Mom." Sarah slowly lowered the photograph. She felt it now. The cabin wasn't just preserved. It was protected. Protected because something had gone wrong. And whatever happened in 1948 was never meant to be forgotten. Sarah sat on the edge of the old bed, the photograph still in her hands. Trust no one. The words felt heavier now. She walked back into the main room and opened the journal again, reading more carefully this time. The entries mentioned land agreements, partnerships, contracts that shifted ownership quietly. Her grandfather had written about protecting something. "The mountains will not belong to them," one entry said. Belong to who? She scanned the earlier pages again. The name H appeared several times. H insists the transfer is temporary. H says no one will question it. Sarah's stomach tightened. She walked to the bookshelf again and searched behind the other books. Nothing. Then she remembered the final line. If anything happens, the proof is hidden. Hidden where? She looked around the cabin slowly. The walls were wooden panels, the floors solid, the fireplace wide and old-fashioned. Her eyes paused on the fireplace. The stones were uneven. One looked slightly newer than the others. She knelt and pressed against it. It shifted slightly under pressure. Her heart began to race. She pushed harder. The stone loosened and fell forward with a dull thud. Behind it was a small cavity. Inside were papers wrapped in cloth, carefully folded, untouched. She pulled them out gently and laid them on the table. They were land deeds, original ownership papers for hundreds of acres surrounding Pine Hollow. Her breath caught. The dates were older than 1948. The signatures clear. Her grandfather's name listed as sole owner. Then she saw another document beneath them. A contract transferring development rights to a company with a familiar name. The same last name from the photograph. The same powerful family that now owned half the town. But something was strange. The transfer document was incomplete. One page missing. The signature line blank. Sarah's pulse pounded. Her grandfather had never finalized the transfer, which meant legally the land might still belong to him or to his heir, her. A loud crunch echoed outside the cabin. Gravel, footsteps. Sarah froze. Lily looked up at her wide-eyed. "Did you hear that?" Lily whispered. Sarah nodded slowly. The cabin was deep in the mountains. No one should know they were here. The footsteps stopped near the front porch. A shadow moved past the window. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She quickly gathered the documents and slid them back into the cloth. Another shadow appeared. 2 people. One voice drifted through the wood walls. "Looks like someone finally opened it." Sarah's breath caught. They knew. The cabin had been sealed for 70 years, and within hours of her breaking the seal, someone had arrived. The doorknob turned slightly. Locked. A pause, then a knock. Slow, measured. Sarah looked at Lily, then at the hidden deeds in her hands. Whoever was outside was not here by accident. The knock came again, not loud, not aggressive, just patient, as if whoever stood outside already knew they would eventually be let in. Sarah's mind raced. She had just discovered land deeds worth more than she could imagine. Acres of mountain property that now surrounded growing towns. If the transfer had never been finalized, then legally the land might still belong to her grandfather's estate. To her, she swallowed hard. Another knock. "Miss," a man's voice called out calmly. "We'd like to talk." "Talk about what?" She stepped quietly toward the window and peeked through a narrow gap in the boards. Two men stood on the porch, well-dressed, clean boots, not hikers. Not locals. One held a folder, the other scanned the clearing carefully. They didn't look surprised to see light inside. They looked prepared. Sarah stepped back from the window. "Who are you?" she called through the door. A brief pause. "We represent Hollow Ridge Development," the man replied smoothly. Her stomach tightened. The same last name from the journal. The same name from the photograph. The company that now owned half the town. "We were informed the property was reopened," he continued. "We have an interest in the surrounding land." Interest. That word again. Sarah's heart pounded. The surrounding land. They knew. She glanced down at the cloth-wrapped documents in her hands. Had they been waiting for someone to break the seal? Had they been watching this cabin all these years? "We can offer you compensation," the man added. "The cabin is not safe. The land is part of a larger development plan. Compensation." She almost laughed. If the deeds were valid, they didn't need to compensate her. They needed her signature, and maybe that missing page had never been signed for a reason. Her grandfather's last journal entry echoed in her mind. They came back today. Was this what he meant? Sarah steadied her voice. "I just arrived," she said. "I haven't decided anything." Another pause. "You should be careful," the man replied, tone slightly sharper now. "These mountains can be unpredictable." A warning, disguised as concern. Lily stepped closer to her. "Mom," Sarah placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Outside, the men shifted their weight but did not leave. They were waiting for fear to do its work. But fear had ruled Sarah's life long enough. She looked around the cabin again. The preserved table, the untouched calendar, the hidden stone in the fireplace. Her grandfather had not sealed this place out of fear. He had sealed it to protect something. And now that protection had passed to her. She stepped closer to the door but did not open it. "If you have business, send it through a lawyer," she said clearly. Silence followed. Then one of the men let out a quiet sigh. "This isn't over," he said. Footsteps retreated slowly from the porch. An engine started in the distance. Sarah waited until the sound faded completely. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from realization. The cabin wasn't just an inheritance, it was leverage. And whatever happened in 1948 had never truly ended. Sarah did not sleep that night. She and Lily stayed inside the cabin with the lantern burning low. Every sound outside felt louder in the dark. Every branch snapping in the wind made her heart jump, but fear slowly turned into something else. Focus. At sunrise, she laid the land deeds across the wooden table again. She studied every page carefully. Dates, signatures, property lines, the missing transfer page. If the land had never been legally transferred, then Hollow Ridge Development had built their empire on incomplete ownership, which meant they needed her, desperately. She packed the documents carefully into her bag. Then she and Lily walked back down the trail toward the nearest town. The same town where Hollow Ridge had its headquarters. The same town where a statue of the developer's grandfather stood in the square. Sarah found the county records office before noon. The clerk looked surprised to see someone carrying documents that old. "These haven't been updated since 1948, the woman said quietly as she flipped through them. "Is the transfer complete?" Sarah asked. The clerk typed slowly into her system. After a moment she looked up. "There's no finalized transfer on file." Sarah's breath caught. "So the land still belongs to the original owner or their heir," the clerk finished. Sarah felt her knees weaken slightly. "That's me," she whispered. The clerk blinked. "You should speak to an attorney immediately." Within hours, word began to spread quietly through town. The heir to Pine Hollow land had appeared. And she was not part of the powerful family everyone expected. By late afternoon, Sarah received a call. A formal invitation from Hollow Ridge Development. This time it was polite, professional. A meeting request. She walked into their office the next morning holding her daughter's hand and carrying 70-year-old proof. The room was quiet when she laid the deeds on the table. Executives exchanged looks. Their confident smiles faded. "We believe this is a misunderstanding," one man began carefully. Sarah met his eyes. "It's not," she said calmly. For the first time in years, she did not feel small. She did not feel desperate. She felt steady. Negotiations began that day. Long, tense, quiet. Hollow Ridge needed legal access to continue their expansion. Without her signature, projects would freeze. Investors would panic. Within a week, an agreement was drafted. Not a buyout, a partnership. Full legal recognition of her ownership. A percentage of every development built on her grandfather's land. And restoration of the mountain cabin as a protected historical site under her name. The day she returned to the cabin, it no longer felt sealed by fear. It felt guarded by history. Lily ran across the clearing, laughing. "Is this really ours?" she asked. Sarah looked at the mountains surrounding them. The land her grandfather refused to surrender. The cabin he sealed to protect truth. "Yes," she said softly. Because the woman who arrived homeless with nothing was leaving as the legal owner of land no one else could claim. And the door that had been sealed since 1948 had finally been opened by the only person meant to unlock it.